I would like now to move to emergency motion 2, and I call Neil Sinclair to come and move that motion. This is the motion which was in the piece of paper you collected on the way in. Emergency motion 2.
Good afternoon, Congress. I'd like to thank the Chair and the Standing Orders Committee for taking this motion. Congress, I believe we need to take a step back and allow time to consider and review the implications of the named person provisions of the Children and Young People Act of 2014 for us as teachers and as a profession. The Act makes it clear that it is a named person who is to be responsible for decisions. I quote, "Where the named person considers it to be appropriate in order to promote, support or safeguard the well-being of the child or young person," followed by a list of actions, including advising the child or parent, helping them access services, and discussing or raising a matter about the child with a local authority or service provider. What concerns me is the onus on the named person to decide which actions are appropriate. Such decisions are important for the child and family involved. They should not be rushed decisions. They should not be compromising decisions. They should be decisions based on evidence, experience, and due consideration. Such decisions take time. Those who accept the responsibility of being a named person should expect the support of their authority in the form of training and the support of their school in recognising the time involved in making good decisions. One test of the strength of these decisions will be the effect they have on the relationship between the school and the child and family involved. I believe that there is potential for conflict here with parents of children with significant and complex educational needs, who are frequently forced into an unequal battle with local authorities to attain an appropriate education for their children. I say this because there is considerable scope for decisions to be made on the basis of judgment, including a judgment on resources. Again, I quote, this time from GIRFEC, Section 3. A judgment based on the gaps that need to be filled and the resources and options to fill them. This places the named person in the position of being a gatekeeper for the resources of the authority, potentially placing him in the invidious position of minimising the requirements of the child to protect the shrinking resources of the authority. All of us here are teachers, and most of us are also parents. It's the latter role which has taught me most about the compromises that can take place in the education system, and that's because my son is autistic. Before my son started school, I had no idea what parents could have to struggle so hard to access the resources needed by their child. And I had by then been a teacher for 16 years, 8 of them as a principal teacher. Some of you may also be parents of children or young people with disability, and some of you will have wonderful stories to tell of exceptional teaching and dedicated professionalism. But we should remember that laws and protocols are put in place for the worst case scenario. There's no need for them when everyone does as they should and acts for the best. I'm not able to tell you the struggles we faced as a family to access the support our son needed, but I can tell you that my reference to gatekeepers comes from personal experience. I can also tell you that local authorities can and do use the full weight of their resources, including legal services up to and including the use of Queen's Counsel in cases of appeal against the content of a coordinated support plan. There's no legal aid available to parents in such a case. The role of a named person is to make serious decisions on the future of a child. That person carries a heavy burden of responsibility to make the right decisions. Given the statutory nature of the provision, there's a potential danger of creating a protectionist mindset across children's services. Providing extra information to make sure that all the options have been covered, that no accusation of negligence can be levelled, can only increase the workload of the named person and add to the time taken to take difficult decisions. Extra information can only add to the difficulty of identifying children genuinely at risk, finding a needle in an ever-growing haystack.
Not yet, no.
One of the aspects of the named person legislation which causes me most concern is that of data protection. Data will be shared with other agencies, obviously. That's the purpose of the legislation. Bringing together information from many sources in the best interests of the child. What concerns me is that the sharing of information may compromise the confidentiality of the individual. The named person guidelines suggest that information is shared on the basis of the well-being of the child. The use of well-being as a criterion for sharing of information rather than the higher bar of risk of neglect or abuse leaves professionals potentially at risk of legal action under data protection legislation. And at present, this distinction forms the part of a case appearing before the Supreme Court, and we're still waiting for a verdict on that. Although much of the data sharing implicit within the named person measures has been in place for some time, the Act gives this statutory power, and that is where we, as a profession, have to start taking a more critical look at these measures. Overall, we have to accept that professional opinions are not facts, and that when professional opinion is drawn from such a wide range of bodies, the chance that some of the opinion is biased or misinformed is increased. Add to this that it is recommended by the Information Commissioner that these opinions are recorded rather than passed on informally, and it leaves the teaching profession in an ambiguous position. Think about it. An opinion given in a meeting is recorded and becomes part of the record for that child. Think about the effect that will have on what you venture as an opinion. The problem is that up till now, information sharing was always based, or mainly based, specifically for the purposes of child protection. We've always passed on concerns up the chain of command and received feedback as to whether or not our concerns are shared. Under the named person, the threshold for sharing information on pupils is much lower. It's gone from significant harm to well-being. On the one hand, this information sharing is presented as a proactive measure to enhance the life chances of children. On the other hand, it's quite explicitly defined as a means to acquire early warnings of abuse or neglect. That dual intent is deeply troubling. Good teaching is based on good relationships, and good relationships are built on trust. What happens to that trust when the role and power of the most important teacher in a school to a child at risk or a child in need of support, their named person, comes under question? What happens to that trust when pupils know they're being constantly tracked in both their academic performance and their well-being throughout the school? We need to look at the training required, the time required to make reliable decisions, and the workload involved in the role of the named person, and the expectations placed on teaching staff to support that role. Delegates, I believe the comprehensive nature of the named person provisions carries far-reaching implications for the workload and responsibilities of teachers. Colleagues, I urge you to support the motion.
Thank you very much, Neil. Is there a second from Neil?
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we all doing? You all quite happy? I'm number 90, colleagues, my age, actually. I would urge you to support Neil's motion. I think it's a very important idea. There is a golden rule for policies. If you can't actually implement them, you scrap them. That's rule one. If you cannot implement it, you get rid of it. You never even formulate it or implement it. This policy is flawed in its detail and implementation, as the parameters and concepts like well-being are solely defined. This has the potential to increase workload exponentially. And it's the workload issue I'd like to talk about. I'd like to focus on that aspect, which I think impacts on teachers a lot, as is evidence this afternoon. Pay and conditions concentrate the mind of all workers. The named persons legislation is a challenge to the working conditions of all teachers. Sadly, job sizing dodged the issue of workload with Macron. Teachers have been pushing at that gate ever since. It relates to the concept of a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and no one here would disagree with that. This leads to negotiations on job sizing, the working week, preparation time, working time agreements, etc. And you'll notice the element there of time, working, workload. They're all connected. I would argue that the named persons legislation is a conditions issue, along with a raft of other issues. A major debate about pay might well include discussion on these new responsibilities. With new assessment developments, teacher workload can only increase. If new paperwork, form filling, etc. cuts into preparation time or time allocated to other duties, other areas must suffer. We all know that. Workload, I'd like to point out one or two aspects of workload. Workload will increase for all staff, especially the named person, who might be responsible for 300 children. Actually, due to the vagueness of well-being and checking, the actual workload is unquantifiable. You can bet, though, that the trajectory is up. If you're a head teacher and a named person, time spent in managing your school will be reduced. This impacts on the education of all children in your care. It is their well-being being compromised. Furthermore, imagine the dilemma of a head teacher who, as a child's named person, has to discipline a child. Guidance staff might be more appropriate, but they always have other responsibilities. Also, there are fewer of them. Cuts in council spending are seeing a reduction in promoted posts. This impacts on workload. Cuts in spending for support staff lead to increased workload for other staff. Assuming that training will be given, this again has workload implications. Data collection and reporting will increase workload for all staff if everyone is checking well-being, which is what the document says you will be doing. How long is the data stored and to what extent is it secure? Is an event when you were 2 years old still relevant when you are 18? Teachers have been chosen to cynically cut costs on implementing this policy. And because we are convenient, teachers see children every day. Yes, we do, to teach them. Surprise, surprise. The reporting role of staff in terms of well-being is unclear. After all, the classroom teacher is well placed to report. If the fallback position is better safe than sorry, expect a mushrooming of reporting and data. And no, this is not just the same as it was before. The named person policy aims to address a perceived disconnect between children and the support agencies. Once the legislation is implemented, the support agencies will logically flood the named person with data. Even if a more measured approach is taken and the named person is merely asked to signpost to all these agencies, that is a major task requiring hours of work. Teachers will instantly become part of the social work and healthcare partnerships and the voluntary sector industry. You cannot be named person in isolation. The serried ranks of agencies already working in this field could potentially see teachers as a point of first contact, providing an avalanche of data or requests for data. Teachers will be seen as the pivotal, the glue, if you like, to the whole system. The whole policy could shift onto the shoulders of the named person. They had never been used, they'd better be broad ones. This would become a full-time job. So, and another point, one final point, if I could just make it, is what will happen during the long holidays? Will you be cutting your well-earned holiday as a named person to deal with emails as a named person? It's a distinct possibility, as there is cost-cutting in all councils. Clearly a child will have to have further named persons. There are many other points I could make. I've run out of time. Please support Neil's motion.
Thank you, Douglas. I think Sid was next.
Sid Sanderson, delegate number 9. Just to acknowledge the last speaker, I'm not a head teacher. I'm not even a guidance teacher. I'm a chemistry teacher, so I'm not going to profess to have a profound knowledge of many of the aspects of the Named Person Act that we've heard from the two speakers today. What I am is a district secretary, and both speakers have identified, and rightly so, the workload implications that principally in secondary schools, guidance teachers have. And that's what I, as a district secretary, have been doing to try and support these guidance teachers. I've been in schools with guidance teachers and head teachers. We acknowledge the workload that they have. We've been looking at ways, as we would with any other particular teacher, looking at ways at addressing the workloads that they have by negotiation. If that doesn't work too well, if we can't get in a particular school the administrative support that the guidance teachers require to carry out these duties, then I'll continue and have conversations with the Director of Education and eventually the Chief Executive. And if that doesn't work, I'll go to West End Place and see what we can do there. The guidance teachers who I've been speaking to don't have a problem by being the named person. They have a problem with the workload. They don't have a problem with the Act. And in Aberdeen, they have been using named person, not legislation, but let's say procedures and protocols for some time now. And none of them have spoken to me about a need to have this Act repealed or not put into legislation. So that's the position that I'm coming from. The second thing that I'm uncomfortable with is that this is a very political Act at the moment as well. There are certain newspapers, I've checked in the Congress book and I don't think they're here. They're Fleet Street newspapers that have usually got Scottish edition at the top. And they have, for a number of months and years now, had front headlines about Nosy Parker legislation, etc., etc. I'm uncomfortable if we pass this motion, approve this motion. I'm uncomfortable with the SSTA being in a position where our name and our association will be in the headlines of these Fleet Street journals. So I would urge, and I think this is probably the first time I've spoken against a motion, I would urge Congress to either oppose this motion, well, I think it actually better opposed actually. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, Sid. And Ward.
Afternoon, Congress. Ward McCormick, number 48. I believe that in certain walks of life there's a saying that goes something like, in the lack of information, speculation becomes fact. And I think that when there's something that people don't know an awful lot about, it's very prone to Chinese whispers. Now, there's a lot of myths going about the named person legislation, and I think that's what we need to tread cautiously with here. Now, my authority, East Ayrshire, has done quite a lot of work in the Named Person Act, and as part of a guidance team and people supporting our school, I've been quite involved in it. And I've heard some of the questions that people have been saying and some of the sort of myths, horrific myths that have been going about the named person legislation. People saying, does that mean I'm going to have to I might be getting phone calls during the summer holidays? Does that mean I might be getting phone calls at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night? And the answer that I've been given to that is no. Because what I've been told and what's come through our local authority is that in principle, the first named person is the local authority. And the local authority delegates that to the school, and the school delegates that to, it may be a deputy head or it may be a member of the guidance team. And I don't think that these things are clear enough. And I think these are the things that we need that need to come back to the table and be made clearer to us. So we need to try and be absolutely clear. The legislation needs to be a lot clearer, needs to be rethought a wee bit before we can think about how this is going to go, because I honestly do not think that things are as bad in this legislation as people think they are. What I said at the time when we had our first meeting with the local authority about it was, because the question was, how is this going to impinge on the role of, per se, the guidance teacher? And my immediate reaction to it was, I don't see anything changing here, because what we had been asked to do is actually the job that we're doing, but we are merely formalising it in a certain way. So I think it needs to be made a lot clearer, so it needs to go back to the drawing board and be cleared up so that we know exactly what we're doing and it's not prone to all the Chinese whispers that are happening at the moment. Please support the motion.
Okay, and we have a contribution from Elaine Henderson.
Elaine Henderson, delegate number 4. Last year we moved a motion, last motion J, underpinning the principles of the named person, and spoke about needing adequate training. And I think that's where we are again this year. We're not asking to look back at the process of named person. What we're saying is we recognise its value, but we do need training and we need the workload to be addressed. Those are the two key things. I think we need to keep those in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. And Anne?
Anne Stewart, Commissioner 58. It was simply a point of information. I believe that there's going to be a national campaign involving leafleting to try and further explain what's involved with this legislation. I was told that by a Director of Education Wednesday night. So that is coming forward. I would not like the SSTA to be used politically, and I would not like the SSTA to have egg on its face. We are on record as supporting the named person legislation, and I have confidence in my own local authority that they are working to make sure this works for every child, and that would also be for every teacher. So I would urge you not to support this emergency motion. In fact, I would ask the mover of the emergency motion to consider withdrawing it.
And Anne?
Hello there, Anne O'Kane, Fife Council, delegate number 23. There's an awful lot going on in the background at this moment in time, things that obviously a lot of people are unfamiliar with. I have with me things that I thought, as the convener of the SN committee, that if I had some time, which you never do have, of course, during the Congress, that I would read some of these papers for a second time. These papers are in draft form. They're from the Scottish Government, and they include an awful lot of the concerns which Neil has raised. We're talking about child's plan resources, the named person function, what will a named person do, what will happen seeking the views of children and young people, practice notes for local authorities on what's going to happen during the actual school holidays, about whether or not a child needed actually support. So there is in fact an awful lot that is happening. Here's another one: outline of practice development materials for named persons and practitioners supporting the named person service. So there is an awful lot going on in the background, and for that reason I feel that I would not be able to actually support this motion, because in fact to delay further implementation is not actually necessary because of the underpinning that is actually happening at this moment behind the scenes. Thank you.
Okay, we've got some contributions opposing the motion. I think we've got maybe one final contribution.
Congress, Mark Gibson, Fife, Delegate 78. I'm going to bring something a wee bit different to the table here, and I'm not going to speak as a teacher. I'm a parent. I am deeply, deeply, deeply uncomfortable with the fact that I believe at the very core that this Named Persons Act is in breach of Article 8 of the ECHR. I'm deeply concerned that actually we as individuals and as an association can potentially sign up to what is an erosion of the ECHR. I know the courts have ruled differently. The law is an ass. Support the motion.
Okay, we've heard some speeches against the motion, which entitles Neil to have a right to reply. So, Neil, if you want to say anything else, you're welcome to come up.
I kind of forgot to identify myself when I came up first. Sorry about that. Delegate 92, Neil Sinclair, South Ayrshire. My motion calls for a delay in further implementation until a thorough review of implications for teachers takes place. I'm not against the legislation. I think a single channel feeding all information from various sources together is a good idea. What I'm worried about is that single channel, the person who is that single channel, will have a huge amount of information to take on board and a huge responsibility to make good decisions based upon that. I don't think we can just say, yeah, that's fine. Yes, it's already there. It's not already there. They've changed the law on the way that the criteria for sharing information is based. On the 16th and 15th and 16th of March in the Supreme Court, go online, you'll find it in the records, you can look at the proceeding, you watch the lawyers' arguments. The case was put that that was a material alteration in the criteria for sharing of information. We need clarity on where we stand. This is law, this is legislation. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much, Neil. Okay, we now move to the votes. Could I have a show of hands for those in favour? Have a show of hands for those against? And abstentions? I think it's carried by a majority. Thank you, Neil.